All right, we are at 5 after the hour, so we will go ahead and get started. So, greetings, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. It is a wonderful day for truth, healing, justice, and real freedom. With that, I welcome you to this opportunity to learn about the final report of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I am Dr. David Falconley II, and I have been honored to serve as chair of this commission since the very beginning in 2019. It has been a labor of love, a labor of commitment, a labor of justice, and I know I speak for my fellow commissioners and staff when I say we are grateful for this opportunity to be a part of history. So we have a jam-packed hour for you, so I will get right to it with some house cleaning. First and foremost, please know that this briefing is being recorded. Please know that there are members of the press in attendance, so anything that is shared, including in the chat, may be used by the press. So govern yourselves accordingly. As to the code of conduct, I will keep it brief. This commission has always operated with the principles of acknowledgement, appreciation, respect, understanding, and love. And so we anticipate that you will do the same during your time in this hearing. If you have any intent to do something contrary to that, I recommend you leave right now. If you think you will get away with that, you will not. Again, there are members of the press. I can tell you that this commission rolls deep. Just don't try it. We want you to, again, operate with those virtues in mind, and we will do the same. That being said, if you do have questions and comments, we invite you to share those questions and comments in the chat. And of course, deeming that they are relevant and resonant to this briefing, we will share them out loud and provide a response as best we can. So at this time, I would like to introduce my colleagues on the MLTRC who will be a part of this briefing this afternoon. So looking at these lovely faces that you see on the screen, again, I'm Dr. David Falconley II, serving as the chair. I introduce Dr. Charles Chavis Jr., who has been vice chair of the commission. Chris Haley, representing Maryland State Archives, who has served as our most recent chair of the research committee. Amy Millen, representing the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project in one capacity, but as an at-large commissioner who has served as chair of the logistics committee. Dr. Nicholas Creary, who officially represents the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, who has served as chair of our Reconciliation Committee, and Commissioner Michelle Coles, a member of the public, who has been instrumental in the work of this final report. So we are grateful to you all for being here to help share this story with those who are joining us this afternoon. So I will briefly provide an overview of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So again, we began in 2019 as a result of House Bill 307, which was primarily championed by then Delegate and now House Speaker Jocelyn Pena-Melnick of Prince George's County. The charge of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission was to explore, to chronicle, and to make space for the telling of this story, the legacy of racial terror lynchings in the state of Maryland. That has included a plethora of research and connection with all parts of this state, local communities, historians, civil rights leaders, genealogists, and those who are committed to, again, preserving and uplifting this story. It has also included 14 public hearings that were held around the state between 2020 and 2025, of one of those including an institutional hearing where we brought the whole story home about those elements that were complicit in the commission of racial terror lynchings across the state of Maryland. That has concluded with the final report that was submitted in December, where we chronicle again the history, the research that was done, and also the recommendations to bring semblances of justice to this legacy. So if we have time, we have a brief video created by one of our most prominent supporters, Will Schwartz, former president of the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project and founder of the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, that gives you all just a snippet of one of our hearings, that being the concluding hearing, the institutional hearing that took place in Baltimore City in April of last year. Do we have the video ready to be shared, or should we? Okay, I'm seeing a shaking of our head. It was a great video. If I can summarize, it just had, again, great snippets of wisdom and insight that was shared by the many uh, experts and witnesses that came to the institutional hearing. I did some drumming. My mom did some singing. It was wonderful. You should have been there. All right, but the video will be available to you all in due time. So our apologies for not being able to share that at this time. But what I will do at this time is to introduce the chair of the research committee representing Maryland State Archives, Commissioner Chris Haley. Chris?
Thank you so much, Chair Fakunle. So I'll make this relatively brief because we have time for questions. And as the chair mentioned, it's a very jam-packed briefing session that we have for you, so as to be concise and allow you all to put in any questions or comments that you have, which hopefully we can address today or through our email as well. In 2019, Governor Larry Hogan signed the law that created the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Our main job was clear. We had a mandate to research cases of racially motivated lynching across the state. But this work didn't start with us. It actually began over a century ago with a lawyer named A. Briscoe Coger. In 1919, he produced a study documenting the extrajudicial murders of African-American men in Maryland between 1889 and 1918. The next big step forward came in 2001. Dr. David Taft Cherry began a new effort at the Maryland State Archives, where he served as research director for the Commission on the Legacy of Slavery. Dr. Cherry's work expanded the timeline of documented atrocities, stretching from 1854 all the way to 1933. By 2006, the archives had launched a website called Judge Lynch's Court, which you can still access today. A decade later, one of our own commissioners, who you'll hear from later, Dr. Nicholas Creary, led a group of Bowie State students to look even deeper. They focused on how these acts were, quote unquote, justified back then. Specifically, how victims were demonized as evil or beasts, regardless of their actual innocence or guilt. Since then, many people and organizations have joined this mission. We want to understand how such inhuman acts were not only allowed to happen, but were often justified and left unpunished for decades. And if we can go to the map, please. To help us do this, the commission secured a federal grant, which allowed us, among other things, to hire Heritage Associates, a specialized research team located in Baltimore. They've been instrumental in helping us sort through the details of the 38 racial terror lynching cases we've identified so far. We also owe a lot to the local Maryland Lynching Memorial Project groups who have done the boots on the ground research in their own counties. For the past 7 years, our process has stayed consistent. We look for the who, what, when, where, and why of every single instance. For the cases we already know about, we double-check the sources to confirm the facts. We identify the victims, the perpetrators, and their descendants. We also look closely at law enforcement and the government to see who acted and who didn't to pursue justice. This report includes detailed overviews of those 38 stories, which our writers at 3PV have put together with incredible patience and care. While this document represents years of hard work by this commission and those who came before us, we know the work isn't finished. We have to stay diligent because we know there are still stories out there that have yet to be told. Thank you for this moment, this time, and I want to introduce our vice chair now to speak on our findings, Charles Chavis.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you all for joining. It's been, as David said, a labor of love and passion, and we're honored to be able to submit the final report and also host this briefing. At this time, I will share just some of the highlights in terms of the various findings that we were able to gather as a result of the research investigation over the course of the commission. The Maryland Lynch Memorial Project was charged with determining what happened, how it happened, and what systems allowed it to happen. Our findings are based on primary source records, public testimony, and expert analysis. What we present today is not interpretation, but it is documented fact. One of the first findings that we highlighted and documented in the course of our research was that racial terror lynchings overall they occurred in violation of due process. In every documented case, the victim was denied due process under the law. Many victims were removed directly from jails or court custody. They were lynched while awaiting trial or appeal. Accusations were unsupported, uninvestigated, and based on rumor. Lynchings functioned as extrajudicial executions, not spontaneous acts. The second finding that a theme that we also uncovered was that state actors enabled, participated, and or failed to prevent mob violence. And this includes law enforcement officers, jailers, coroners, judges, prosecutors. They often routinely failed to intervene and in some cases were directly involved. In multiple cases, jail doors were unlocked, prisoners were transferred knowing mobs were waiting. Officials delayed or refused to call for protection. In other cases, local fire chiefs and others provided and abetted and supported the various lynchings. In the case of Matthew Williams, Chief Greer provided the rope in which he was lynched with. This constituted state complicity through action and or omission. Third, no accountability was ever imposed. Not a single perpetrator was arrested, charged, or convicted. Coroner's juries frequently ruled lynchings as deaths by persons unknown. They were cleared, local officials were always cleared of wrongdoing. This pattern normalized mob violence and reinforced impunity. Fourth, lynching was a tool of racial and political control. Lynchings increased during periods of black political participation, land ownership, and economic success. Victims often targeted were often targeted not because of proven crimes, but because they voted, they owned property, and they challenged the racial hierarchy. Racial terror enforced white supremacy through public spectacle and fear. Next, Maryland's enforcement of segregation also enabled this continued dehumanization. Post emancipation, Maryland enforced segregated schools, voter suppression, political exclusion. These policies violated the 14th Amendment and laid the groundwork for extra-legal violence. Lynching thrived where black citizenship was denied. The media played an active role in sustaining racial terror. White-owned newspapers specifically routinely sensationalized allegations against black men. They justified mob violence as community justice. They advertised lynching locations. They erased black voices and humanity and testimony. Media coverage helped legitimize violence and silence dissent. One specific note in terms of the media that I would like to highlight is that a lot of the research that we were able to conduct was supported by the heroic work of the Baltimore Afro American, it was in the Afro American and where we were able to salvage the humanity of some of the victims, and because of their investigative journalism, we were able to follow those pieces and crumbs to continue the work of our contemporary investigation. Seventh, racial terror was systemically erased from public memory. So lynching histories were omitted from textbooks, absent from official records, ignored by state institutions. This erasure compounded harm and prevented healing. Silence became a continuation of this violence. Lastly, enduring harm persists today. The legacy of racial terror lynching includes a deep mistrust of lynching of legal, and local legal and government systems, intergenerational trauma in Black communities. Structural inequalities also remain visible to this day. These harms are ongoing, they are not historical abstractions. That's all I have, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you. I'm going to speak a little bit about the county hearings. As you just heard from Commissioner Haley, the commission held 14 public hearings between 2021 and 2025. 13 of the hearings took place in counties where one or more of the 38 documented racial terror lynchings had occurred. While the majority of those hearings involved a single county, as you can see on the list, 3 of the hearings combined 2 or more counties. For example, Caroline, Kent, and Queen Anne's counties combined together into a single hearing that was held in Chestertown, Kent County. The hearings typically ran about 4 hours, and they were recorded, they were live streamed, and they were also in person. The commission worked with local community members, the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project affiliated coalitions, local governments, and other organizations and institutions to plan each of the hearings. These local partners were invaluable and instrumental to involving local voices, identifying safe hearing venues that ensured accessibility, parking, and technological capabilities. And also our local partners assisted with raising awareness that the public hearings were occurring and helped link us to local media sources. The commission developed a hearing framework that was adjusted and adapted with local input for each of the hearings, making them unique. This includes the incorporation of descendant testimony, as well as local issues that were identified by those communities that they believe were outcomes that resulted from the act of racial terror lynching. Another example of incorporation of unique assets that were found in each of the communities were the music and arts. Each hearing included a history overview, such as introducing facts about the victim and his murder, as well as the historical context at that time and place. It included testimony from descendants and from topic experts. There was also a public comment section that focused on next steps or recommendations. In addition, counselors attended all of the hearings to provide emotional support for those testifying, for members of the public in attendance, our contractors such as our ASL interpreters and our live stream team, and to us, the commission. The 13 county hearings not only served as a vehicle to speak the truth of this state's history, but also included the content of the hearings that informed the recommendations that were presented in the commission's final report. The hearings created, in addition, opportunities for participants to be in conversation with each other. I'm now going to turn the next stage of the briefing over to Commissioners Curry and Coles, who are going to talk about recommendations.
Thank you, Commissioner Millen. So we want to start with talking about the legal basis for some of the remedies that we've set forth in the report. And to focus your attention really on the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. So as everyone knows, in the United States, there was a Civil War. And after the Civil War, the United States Constitution was amended in 3 major ways, with that being the passage of the 13th Amendment that prohibited slavery unless you were convicted of a crime, the 14th Amendment, which I will go over in more detail, and the 15th Amendment, which prohibited preventing people from voting on account of their race or color or national origin. Going back to the 14th Amendment, it says that no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. And as we've found, as Vice Chair Chavis discussed in our findings, what we found is that the systematic lynchings of Black men as a means of exerting white supremacy and controlling the Black populations and denying them any due process in the process, any due process was a violation of their 14th Amendment rights. The 14th Amendment also says that no person shall be denied or nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of its laws. And so that really speaks to the lack of accountability that the people faced who engaged in lynchings and participated in lynchings, in that they were never held accountable. Many of them were agents of the state, were represented as sheriffs or judges or prosecutors, either in their involvement in the lynching or in the conspiracy to not hold the people who participated in the lynchings accountable. And so, because of that, we think that the state has an obligation to implement remedies to address the constitutional violations of Black Marylanders that they contributed to. Next slide.
Okay, I guess this is me. Um, yes, so broadly speaking, we, grouped the recommendations into 9 different categories. And you have them here. I'm not going to read them all at you at this point, but, we'll go through each of them, sort of highlighting sort of what, sort of the basic ideas and what the themes of them were. But I just want to point out that, one of the sources of, discussion and, sort of the foundation of these was using, international human rights law and some of the principles therein. And, I'll just highlight a couple of them, and you'll see them again. The idea of compensation and material compensation, that is something that, has been part and parcel of, international human rights law and the whole idea of reparations. You can take that all the way back to, um, going back to the indemnities, following World War One. It was, sort of rooted in that idea of, victims, are entitled to compensation. And if not the victims, then certainly their families. And then the other one that I'll highlight is, it's like the principle of non-reoccurrence. In other words, harms have been committed, and, part of, the reparations process is to make sure that these don't happen again. Um, and I'll stop there, sort of with the broad overview for now. And, we can dive more deeply into these, with each slide and, following during the Q&A.
So the first recommendation that we have is that Maryland issue an apology. We looked at a lot of examples of reparations that had been given by different government entities. One of the ones that we looked at was the reparations that was given to Japanese Americans as a result of their internment during World War II, and that bill included an apology for how the rights of those Japanese Americans had been violated. It also included compensation. And so that bill served as one of the models that we used in crafting our remedies. And so we believe that Maryland should apologize for violating the constitutional rights of Black Marylanders that they had under the 14th Amendment, as well as their role, as well as Maryland's role in the murder of each of the victims. And we documented, as we said, 38 cases. So each of those victims of racial terror lynchings, as well as any additional lynchings that have not yet been discovered, or any attempted racial terror lynchings, because that's another thing that we found in doing our research, is that the 38 people whose stories we were able to highlight is definitely not the full extent of racial terrorism that Black Marylanders experienced. There were attempted lynchings, and there are cases that we still, we're not able to find evidence for and don't know about.
So looking at, material compensation, as I said, that was one of the principles of international human rights that we use as a foundation. And again, not surprisingly, the recommendation, sort of this is Section B, number one, looking for monetary compensation to the families of the victims. That seems to be the piece that, the press has been latching on to. And I will just say again, as you'll see, we have an awful lot more to talk about than simply material compensation and monetary compensation. And I will just add to that, and again, many people know about this, a lot don't, but in March of 1891, 11 Italians were lynched in New Orleans. And those families were compensated by the U.S. government in the amount of $2,211.90, was given to each of the victims' families. That translates to approximately $78,000 to $80,000 in 2026 money. So there is precedent for this. And as um, one of the witnesses at the April hearing said, the United States knows about reparations and monetary compensation because it's done it before. Um, and again, if you go through, the rest of Section B, you'll see that there are quite a few different ideas for ways to compensate the victims, the victims' families and the victims' communities.
Sorry. So, another recommendation deals with criminal justice reforms. And the two main things that we were trying to address are increasing due process protections and increasing accountability for racial violence. And both of those are really grounded in trying to prevent instances today that continue to have echoes of what took place during the lynchings, the racial terror lynchings. And so, as an example for that, you see a higher disproportionate amount of police use of force and deadly force against Black people. And it could be for much smaller infractions, not using the same level of restraint. And so, what we really want to do is find any way that we can increase the due process protections that people face, so that they're not being summarily executed for without a trial. And similarly with accountability, and it's not just police, but this is also hate crimes. African Americans are the largest victims of hate crimes. And when those hate crimes occur, we want to see increased accountability to serve as a deterrent, as well as if a police officer uses unwarranted deadly force against an African American, we think there should be accountability for that. And so these recommendations are really grounded in what caused the lynchings, what allowed the lynchings to occur, and are there modern parallels that we want to address so that the legacy of lynching is no longer with us. We also made some recommendations that would involve prosecutorial reform and recommending the judiciary take a greater role in coordinating the prosecutor's office and the defender's office to try to see what they can do within their own offices to increase the due process protection so that innocent people are not and again, another statistic: Black Marylanders have the most likelihood of being wrongly convicted of a crime, and so all of these things to prevent that from happening and bringing these injustices to an end. Is that you, Nick?
Commissioner Coles, it looks like
Did
Commissioner
Nick fall off?
Dreary dropped off.
Okay, all right, I'll continue.
Yeah.
So another category that we have is community healing, and this is looking at the fact that lynchings, they weren't just crimes against an individual, they were message crimes similar to hate crimes today. They were hate crimes, and hate crimes are message crimes sent to an entire community. And so it's not just the lynching victim who suffers, it is everyone in that community that was a recipient of that message of you're not safe, the government will not protect you. You better stay within the circle that we have for you to be under control. And if you step out of that, there will be consequences. And so that's why community healing is so important, is because the descendants of people who lived in these communities, that trauma also has gotten passed down to them. And so some of the ways that we're looking at community healing are what can we do to increase affordable housing, job training, career development, specifically in communities where racial terror lynchings occurred. How do we protect historically Black communities, institutions, and organizations? Are there additional grants that could be provided to do that? And a lot of times when a lynching occurred in a community, that would be an impetus for people to flee that community. And it may have been a community that their ancestors were enslaved in and that they had been living in for hundreds of years, and they no longer felt safe there. And would, if this happened in the countryside, they would leave and go to Baltimore or Philadelphia. And so we wanted people to have a right of return to the communities that they may have fled in the case of a racial terror lynching, as well as the importance of documenting this history and creating spaces for people to talk about it in communities. I see you're back, Nick.
Yes, yes. Sorry about that. Sort of the victim of hotel internet. So thank you for your patience and thank you for picking up there,
No
Michelle.
problem. Next slide. It's you.
Yeah, looking at education, and again, this is coming from I think probably one of the single largest consistent, requests coming out of the hearings was that this history, the experiences of these communities and of the victims be included in, reformed and revised education curricula. And also that we, provide the professional development so that the teachers who are being asked to teach this can do so competently. Again, there's about 8 or 9, specific recommendations within this particular area, but these are just some of the highlights there. Next slide.
So mental health recommendations. This is similar somewhat to the community recommendations, but this is really dealing with the effects of the trauma that racial violence has had in Black communities and how that trauma manifests in different ways, from destructive behavior, self-harm, higher crime rates, different things. And so we would like the state to invest in resources that are dedicated to addressing the specific mental health needs of Black Marylanders that have resulted from this history of racial terrorism and violence. So some of those proposals include creating community wellness centers in places where lynchings occurred, anti-violence prevention programs, looking at addressing anti-Black discrimination in healthcare, mental health care for Black elders, as well as people that are incarcerated in the legal system. Increasing the availability of Black mental health workers through scholarships and different programs, just so that people that are seeking out mental health services can find people that look like them, have a shared background that they may be able to feel more vulnerable with and relate to because of that. And that's me.
I think that's, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we also made some recommendations for the media. This was definitely I would say one of the trickiest proposals that we worked on, because we were definitely cognizant of the First Amendment and the constraints that places on the government restricting people's freedom of speech in any way. But we still believe that the media has a responsibility to not foment racial hatred. And one of the things that we saw, and this is one of our findings in our report, was the very important role that the media played. And this is speaking more to the legacy media, not the black press, but the main, white media, in that they were almost served as an accomplice to lynchings a lot of the times. They advertised where the lynching was taking place so everyone knew where to go. They would describe the person who was being lynched in, just very awful, heinous terms that would not give that person any sympathy. They wouldn't bother talking to their family or, anyone that would humanize them. And then the victim, of course, not the lynching victim, but the supposed victim of the crime that the lyncher was accused of committing, would be painted as, just a perfect victim. And so the media contributed, I think, a lot to the environment where Black people were able to be lynched, and there would be no consequences for the participants. And so and the Baltimore Sun itself a few years ago wrote an apology, and so I encourage everyone to look it up. But they wrote an apology for their role in contributing to lynchings. But we think that and more than an apology is necessary. And again, this is an example of where we see the media oftentimes continuing to play a similar role as crimes take place today. And so we would this recommendation is more of an ask to the media to be more self-reflective on how it contributes to racial animosity and discord, and what it can do to hold itself to a higher standard and engage in more of a truth-telling process. And so those are how those recommendations are framed.
Okay, so looking at symbolic recommendations, and again, these are, as I say, sort of, symbolic in that, again, we're not necessarily looking, for monetary, compensation or anything like that. But again, if we, sort of take the premise, from Brian Stevenson, the director of, or the president of the Equal Justice Initiative, that truth and reconciliation are sequential. We have to recognize the truth that harms were committed. And so recognizing them, through developing memorials, or, again, some of the families, said they were never able to give their family members proper burials, right? Um, Posthumous indictments, again, we've been able to identify a significant number of members of lynch mobs. And so, although we can't necessarily bring them to trial, we can remove the cloak of anonymity that has protected them for over 100 years in most cases. So this is an opportunity, to identify and acknowledge, and to say, we know what you did, and now the world will too. You cannot hide from this anymore. Um, and so, yeah, there are a number of them. And as I said, these are the kinds of recommendations and reparations that will cost the state nothing, financially anyway. And the next slide. And then lastly, looking at implementation, one of the things, yes, the commission is going to sunset, come the end of June, but we want to make sure that there is accountability. And so the first thing that we want to see happen is to make sure that we establish a permanent agency that will follow up and make sure that the recommendations are enacted and, carried out. And again, we want to make sure that all of the information, the progress on these, is fully transparent and accessible to everyone. Um, One of the things that the Canadian Truth and Reconciliation Commission did was they worked with an external monitor to kind of identify how are they doing in terms of implementing, and they said, well, not surprisingly, They've done a great job on the symbolic, recommendations, but they haven't really followed through on the material. We need to have something similar happen here. And then lastly, we recommended allocating proactively funds to prepare for the defense because inevitably there are going to be legal challenges. And, the Department of Justice has, started cracking down or has given notice, to I think it was Buncombe County in North Carolina, that a reparations scheme is violating their interpretation. Um, so we need to be prepared to defend these recommendations in court. And, just to take it to that next step, we've begun the process of taking I'd say about the first 24, 25 recommendations. And again, the ones that don't cost anything and starting to write them up as draft bills so that they will be introduced hopefully during this session so that we can begin the process of enacting recommendations and bringing them, to fruition.
All right, so thank you to our commissioners, particularly Commissioner Curry and Commissioner Coles, for the overview of the recommendations. So, acknowledging that we have about 15 minutes left in this briefing, we do want to make time for questions and providing answers as best we can. So, thank you to those who have submitted their questions in the Q&A section and in the chat. Again, we will do our best to answer as many as we can with as much depth as we can. So what I'm going to do is just trying to go through some of the simple questions that can be answered quite quickly. One question was the operational definition of lynching. It is important to note that we have specified racial terror lynching. And the operational definition of a racial terror lynching is the extrajudicial killing of a black person, a person of African descent, by a white mob, so a group of people for the preservation of white power or white supremacy. So that is the definition that we use. If you look through history, there have been multiple definitions of racial terror lynching used by different organizations. One of the first decisions that we made as a commission is what definition we would utilize. There was another question about a response from the governor. At this time, we have not received any communication from the governor or his office. We still welcome that and welcome the opportunity to discuss the final report and how best we can go through the implementation of the recommendations. To another question regarding the involvement of the Maryland General Assembly, as Commissioner Creary spoke, we are working on the crafting of legislation and are active in conversation with members of the Maryland General Assembly to see what legislation can be supported and adopted and hopefully go through the legislative process. We recognize that the totality of our recommendations will take time. We recognize the importance of patience, especially given the context of time in which we are doing this work. And so we are active in the process of, again, nurturing those relationships that will allow for the best implementation of recommendations as possible. So to that, we know that there are some more in-depth questions that we, again, will do our best to provide thorough answers. So I will make space for my fellow commissioners to share those questions out loud and offer some responses.
Commissioner Haley, do you have a question ready?
I think I do. One that just came in. Some of this is going to be, well, actually, I'm going to read a question that we got off of our MLTRC email, which is from Dreesen Heath. It's question, given the depth and breadth of the 84 recommendations across 9 categories, has the commission identified a sequencing or priority framework for implementation? If so, what role do you see Maryland advocates and policy experts playing in supporting the introduction and implementation of these processes.
Nick, do you want to address the first half about sequencing, and then I'll address the second half?
Yeah, I mean, my personal, idea, and again, sort of going through this was that, first and foremost, we're going with the recommendations that don't require a fiscal note or that don't, require a budget. We're very much aware that the state is facing, what is it, a $1.5 billion deficit, so that, so yeah, first and foremost, we don't want to contribute to that. But then also, this says that, again, reparations is about more than money and monetary compensation. I think it will be very interesting to see how the discussion goes when, they see, all right, here are, potentially 13 bills, you know, asking for reparations, but not asking for money.
And in terms of how allies can support, our chair is actually going to address that on the next slide. But I just wanted to say that we could take all the help that we could get in raising this work up and talking about it in your communities with fellow advocates and reaching out to legislators, in giving us feedback on on ideas. And so if you're interested in being involved in more granular level, shoot us an email. And but yeah, so I think there's lots of ways to be involved and contribute. And as Chair Fakunle said, this we see this as having a longer horizon, whereas our commission comes to a conclusion this upcoming summer. And so we are going to depend on advocates for keeping this work and these recommendations at the top of policymakers' minds, so that it does continue to live.
Yeah, and if I can just, jump in one more thing. Again, I think, the bills that we're working with, included, I think it was 24 of the 84 recommendations. And so we laid it out over, a 5-year time frame to have all of the recommendations implemented. We're not going to be able to get everything done all at once. So we're thinking, yeah, the commission sunsets in June, but there's a plan to make sure that over the next several years, these recommendations are going to be implemented.
Commissioner Fakunle, do we have a time for one more question?
Yes, we do.
Um, this may be for Commissioners Coles and Creary, and then I'll follow it up with another one. What recommendations do you have for training and education of law enforcement? Comes from one individual, and another question is about best practices operationally for a commission like this, keeping in mind other upcoming commissions.
So for the first question on training and on law enforcement, absolutely, we have a lot of recommendations on that. One of the recommendations that we have is ending qualified immunity for officers that are where it's been determined that they violated department policy and department training. And so that's outside of actual training, but it's a very significant recommendation because it would hold the individual officer liable for his or her wrongdoing, as opposed to passing that liability on to the state. And so we think that would incentivize people being more cautious on when they use force, if they know that they'll be held responsible. But in terms of training, yes, there's a number of different recommendations, and they are all aimed at increasing those due process protections and doing what can be done to increase accountability for wrongdoing. Oh, and for the second question about recommendations, I'd actually pass that to you, Amy, in reference to the appendix that is in the report.
Yeah, so the report is slightly over 600 pages. It is accessible on the commission's website. And at the back of it is sort of best practices or recommendations for future commissions. So the answer is yes, we did do a reflection and are hoping to pass forward lessons learned for future work.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in, with reference to the first question. I think it was 27 out of the 84, were in the sphere of criminal justice reform. So that's about a third of the recommendations are all sort of aimed at criminal justice reform and policy.
All right. Thank you, commissioners, for those responses. I do want to honor Rashim and the many questions that were shared representing the Baltimore Legacy Project. I will do my best to respond to the kind of zeitgeist of those questions. So, again, the commission itself sunsets on June 30th of this year. So, by statute, our work is done. However, we have certainly crafted this work with the encouragement that future efforts, whether they are on the state level or on the local level, whether government mandated or done just out of a commitment to justice, will continue. As you heard, thinking about specific media outlets that were particularly complicit in the promotion of racial terror lynchings. Certainly, one of the common denominators that showed up was the Baltimore Sun. As Commissioner Coles mentioned, they did issue an apology a few years ago for their role, and we certainly hope that they will consider doing more in the name of justice, based on, again, their involvement in the legacy of racial terror lynchings. As to the methodologies that were employed, I certainly recommend checking out the final report. And if there are additional questions, then you can certainly reach out to the commission. And again, we can provide as thorough a response as possible to your inquiries in that regard. So being mindful of the last 4 minutes that we have, we will start to again close out this briefing. So we do have some ways that again you all can continue to be involved, and we certainly want to honor those who have been supporters of the commission from the very beginning. Anytime that you have jumped on this story, we are grateful. So first and foremost, spread awareness. I can tell you that the number one recommendation that was shared with us from the people, including the descendants, was to tell the truth. And you can do that by spreading awareness of this commission and its work. Please contact your state representatives. Again, we are very intentional about turning our recommendations into legislative action when it makes sense. So having the support of state representatives will be very important. Please connect with your community leaders and the organizations in your area to amplify your voice. We are here because of the amplification of voice. And so it is a powerful tool. Please continue to use it. You can comment or write to newspapers and support any viable media outlets that are willing to learn about this story. We are appreciative of that opportunity. And also, this is a moment among many moments to set this precedent for justice. We have done this work in the backdrop of a lot of stuff, and I will not go into details, and yet we have completed the work as we were assigned to do by law. So, yes, it is possible even in the face of many challenges, but as we have reiterated, the work does not end with the sunset of this commission. Please own this story. It does not just belong to us as commissioners and the staff, it belongs to you all. You know it, it's yours. Use it, elevate it, amplify it. We cannot let this go to waste. So we truly thank you all again for your commitment, your involvement, your trust in us to honor this story as best as we can. We hope that you all are proud of what we have done and grateful as we are proud and grateful for what we have done. And please know this is not the end. This is just the start of another chapter. So, as we continue to close, we will share this wonderful quote that was shared with us during one of our hearings, the institutional hearing at the end of that series. And it goes, "The history of lynching is not simply a chapter from the past. It reverberates through generations, shaping our present day dynamics of race, justice, and power in this state and across the nation." If I were to synthesize that, pay attention to what's going on, look at what we've done. There you go. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We must reach back to move forward. That is the principle of Sankofa. And so that we encourage you to hone in on that principle because it can get us through the challenges of today. And so, again, this is y'all story. Own it, be proud of it, make sure other people learn it too. So with our official close, thank you all again for attending this briefing. We are indebted to those who have given their time, their energy, their knowledge, and their wisdom over these past 6 years. Uh, all the information and again, the story of the MLTRC is available on our website. You can also access via the QR code that is provided. And I will say for me, being in this role, this is one of the most important things I've ever done in my life. Hopefully, I got many more years. This is my birthday, great way to spend it. But knowing the work that was done over these past 6 years, I can hang my hat on this and say this was worth my life. And I'll speak to and for my fellow commissioners to say this was worth our time, our energy, our lives. So again, much gratitude and appreciation. Thank you for your time. Please continue to stay in touch. And until then, stay safe, keep your mind right, keep your spirit right, continue to fight for justice. Peace.